Okie dokie, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. We are at 10:30, and it is time for another round of Astro-Babble. Thank you, everybody who's been sending in birth dates, places, and times, and contributing to the queue. I really am enjoying this morning hour together, where we get a chance to talk astrology, talk about some personal things, give everybody a chance who would not necessarily be able to afford a consult to experience a little taste of what astrology can do. The messages that everybody's been sending me have been absolutely amazing and heartwarming, and I'm very appreciative for the contribution. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to take 8 more charts. We have the birth dates and places and exact birth times of 8 individuals. We are going to read them, cold read them. I've run them in my Astro software for those of you who are asking. I use whole sign houses, and my Astro software is Solar Fire. And we're going to pop open a fizzy water and get the hell to it. Good morning, everybody. So let's start with Addison. Good morning, Addison. How you doing, baby? So Addison was born 11:22 p.m. in Sebring. Let's take a peek at Addison's chart. So we have an Aries ascendant, but Uranus in Aries is retrograde on that ascendant. Absolutely ridiculous. So Uranus is one of the outer planets, and it's a planet that's generational. So everybody in your generation, Addison, will have that Uranus in Aries, but you've specifically decided to stick it right smack dab on your 20-degree ascendant. They're exactly conjoined. Uranus is that outer planet that's known for things like unpredictability, for things like natural disasters, for things like electrical shortages. So when we think of that Uranian energy that's very disruptive, not slightly, it's goddamn chaotic is what it is. But it's always meant to be upstartling to then break the soil to churn nutrients up from the bottom of that experience up to the topsoil for the next round of planting is a good way to think about it. So it's constructive. It's a constructive breakdown, but a breakdown nonetheless. And for that to be attached to the ascendant, the major personality marker of the chart, we have a lot of high energy in the personality. We have a lot of disruption in the personality. It would be very easy for somebody to look at this chart and say ADD, ADHD. That's not something that I'm qualified for, nor would I recommend any astrologer doing that. But with that Aries ascendant paired with that Uranian energy, that chaos is definitely something that we're going to need to keep an eye on and to keep in check. So let's just make sure that we don't get out of control with that ascendant nonsense right off the bat. And we respect that sometimes the medicine is just running around and letting that electrical stimulation that Uranus brings into the chart to literally ground through that Aryan activity of physically exerting the muscles. Let's see. Also, because Aries is on the ascendant with that Uranus, I think one of the things that we need to be aware of medically is that there are potential issues trauma-wise to the head. So when it comes to extreme sporting events, when it comes to any unsupervised athletic activity, we always need to make sure that there's a chaperone. We always need to make sure that there's somebody watching who has medical training, because Uranus on the ascendant in the sign of Aries, which rules the head, the muscles, as well as the blood, not necessarily ideal from a medical standpoint. We do have the moon in Taurus, though, in the second, which is something that I really, really enjoy seeing. The moon is in its exaltation in Taurus. It loves to be in Taurus. There's an emotional steadiness that's underneath all of this ascendant chaos. And it's in that second house of finance. So there's this real appreciation for material wealth, material value, things that can be measured, things that can be concrete. Again, one of the ways that we might discharge that Aryan spark, that cardinal fire that's present on the ascendant, is to invoke methodologies of Taurus, like keeping a ritual, keeping a set schedule, making sure to surround yourself with good food, making sure to activate that heart center by bringing in positive stimulation, physical love and affection as well, things that will help to ground all of that cardinal fire via the fixed earth sign of Taurus. That fixed earth sign of Taurus in the second house is being ruled by a Leo moon, Venus in Leo, retrograde, as well as Mercury in Leo and Jupiter in Leo, all in the fifth house. This is a firecracker. Oh my gosh, the more I get into this chart, like the fire energy is so dominant in this chart. It's absolutely ridiculous. First and foremost, to have the sun in Leo in that fifth house of creativity, just absolutely mind blowing from a creative standpoint. I really, really enjoy that placement. Also, a large majority of the ego boosts are going to come from parents, but also children. That's just something that we see with the sun in Leo in the fifth. Having Venus and Mercury and Jupiter all in Leo in the fifth house as well just brings a lot of beauty, a lot of mental creativity, and a lot of Jupiterianness, that expansion of that house into that creativity mindset. And because it's being ruled by that moon in Taurus, and likewise, there's a Venus in Leo that's kind of in a half mutual reception with it. We have a connection between using that creative energy for financial gain, financial resources. So I think that all of that unbridled Aries energy that we're trying to damper down, one of the ways that we do that is by constructively funneling them into art projects or things that enhance that creativity. And then once they've got that creativity, they channel all their energy there and they're actually able to make a profit from it, as opposed to other charts which don't necessarily have those helpful placements. I think actually one of the things that Addison is kind of born to do at this point is to raise a family, because we have this North Node in Libra in the seventh house of relationships, being ruled by Venus and Leo in the fifth house of children, but also parents, sexuality, creativity. That North Node in the seventh ruled by the fifth house of children and parents. Like there's a big striving towards hunkering down, finding an ideal mate, having the white picket fence that everybody personally really, really enjoys. And I think the financial ability of his charts to make that happen is very clear. But I also think that when we take somebody who has such an amazing level of fiery, energetic creativity in the chart, one of the best ways that we can anchor that creativity and to really make sure that that energy is spent wisely is to distribute it among a family, and to really ground it in the roots of a lineage, of a heritage. And that's really something that I think would be very positive for Addison to work on long term. As all of the creative efforts start to bear fruit, the next question is, well, how do I hunker down with somebody and create a life and pass this creativity on to the next generation? So that's definitely something that I think is very important for Addison to channel. First, once we get that creative fire under control, then we get the emotional stability of like the pleasant things that Taurus enjoys, and then channeling that via creativity into the family dynamic. That's the crux of the chart for sure. Yeah, I think that's a good kickoff for our charts this morning. Thank you everybody for jumping on. Albert, Dara, Tony, everybody who's jumping on to the forecast via or not the forecast, the live stream. I already did the forecast. It's on Facebook and Instagram if you don't see my daily forecast. Thank you, Instagram, Facebook. Yes, if you would like to send in your birth date, place an exact birth time, that's what I need to put you in the queue, and we will stack you up. But for now, let's go to chart number 2 of 8. And we're looking at Sarah. Sarah, how you doing, girl? How you doing? We got 5:20 p.m. for Sarah in Exeter. Ooh, Lord. Okay. So we got a stellium with the North Node, Moon, Neptune, and Venus all in the 8th house. And then we also have a Capricorn stellium in the 7th house with Jupiter, Mercury, the Sun, Mars, and Pluto. Mars is also conjoined Pluto in Capricorn. That's a fun mix, Sarah. And when I say fun, I say that with an appropriate amount of both love and concern. First and foremost, one of the things that we need to respect is that the Lord of your chart, the moon, which is because you have a Cancer ascendant, that Cancer ascendant makes you very emotionally sensitive, the heart space, those maternal instincts, very much a part of your personality. But we have this moon in Aquarius over in the 8th house, although we have emotions that are naturally going to shape your identity, the emotion that you're going to feel as most dominant is going to be distance, is going to be pushing people away, is going to be the need to retreat, in some ways to die, to fake your death to society in order to recluse and to not be seen. That's something that you personally require on a very regular basis, and there's good reason for that. Um, a lot of your spiritual experiences and a lot of your heart space are tapped into that eighth house theme of death. And so when we see the moon, especially in the eighth house, but even more so when the moon is ruling the chart and just a couple degrees away from Neptune in Aquarius, there's a sense of mediumship, there's a sense of psychic abilities, there's a sense of a overbearing intuition almost, where that almost telepathic energy of Aquarius starts to get overwhelmed very, very easy. And so the easiest way to process all of those unprocessable in some way impulses from the ethers is to basically just run away, which isn't a wrong response. It's something that you'll grow to process a little bit more healthfully. But in the beginning, especially, the idea of just fleeing is something not to be ashamed of as you learn how to process these intuitive nudges and these extrasensory experiences that are so present in your chart. Because it's not going away, Sarah. Let me tell you this, it's definitely not going away. In fact, you're actually supposed to be teaching them. You're supposed to be teaching other people how to work with those intuitive abilities, as well as not just death, but also estates, taxes, business, entrepreneurship, all those things that the eighth house rules. You have Saturn ruling, and Saturn is in that third house of writing, teaching, communication in Virgo. You'd actually be very, very good at writing a book about the intuitive experiences that you've had when you were younger, and turning that into one of the ways that you make an income. Although the primary form of income for you will be spousal. We do have that sun in Capricorn in the seventh, ruling the second house of finance, which tells us that money will likely, a majority of money will come from a spouse. Let's see, but that Saturn and Virgo in the third, I enjoy Saturn and Virgo in the third for a couple reasons. So first and foremost, this is a writing, teaching, communication house, and we can't write, teach, or communicate without some form of organization, which Virgo does very, very well, extremely well. In some cases, way too well, especially because Saturn is stationed here. Saturn is that planet of restriction. It's that planet that will mature around year 30. So those writing, teaching, communication gifts will likely not come to the surface or not be accessed or utilized until about year 30, when that Saturn placement in the third house ripens in Sarah's chart. But that Saturn is ruling both the eighth house and the seventh house, where again, we have 5 her planets in Capricorn and 3 planets plus the North Node in frickin' Aquarius. All of this writing and all of this teaching and all of this communication is very much tied up into the sense of identity. So transmuting the early life experiences, especially from a psychic and intuitive nature, because of that moon Aquarius in the eighth, is going to be very important. But let's take a minute to talk about the spouse real quick. We have a spouse that Sarah is going to choose and who Sarah is attracted to. This is actually something important for all of you watching who are trying to learn astrology. The seventh house of relationships does not just describe the spouse, it also describes the ideal relationship and who somebody is naturally attracted to. So when we see a Saturn ruled seventh house right off the bat, we know that somebody's going to have Saturnian traits. They're going to be mature, either internally in terms of very wise, like old soul, and or somebody who's older, being attracted to an older partner. When we see Jupiter here, as well as Pluto here, as well as the sun here, there's a very regal energy to Sarah's partners. Somebody who acts like a king, somebody who may very well be the king of their own domain. But because that Saturn is also in that third house ruling the seventh house of relationships, there's an idea that Sarah just won't become a writer, teacher, communicator, but she will be married to somebody in that same field, because so much of her life is pulling her in that direction that it just makes sense to shack up with somebody who's doing the same work that she does. And in some ways, I think that's really helpful because they can cross-check each other. But the spouse that Sarah's going to be attracted to is actually going to be very authoritative. Somebody who definitely, I would say, has a chip on their shoulder, because we have so many planetary energies here. They're technically all what we would consider quote unquote masculine planets, or planets that are active, projective, energetically young, as opposed to yin. All of the yin, the Venus, the Neptune, as well as the moon, all present within the eighth house for Sarah. So that's where all of her intuitive and personality traits are, but she's going to be partnered with this archetypal, slightly boastful, yet reserved, powerful, but unassuming type character that embodies the glorified Saturn archetype, is a good way to think about it. So that's a little bit about Sarah's chart. Thank you, Sarah, for donating your chart to science. Let's continue to jump forward. Hi, Tony. Hi, Fran. Hi, Marcelo. Thank you for coming on from Brazil, Marcelo. I appreciate that. These live streams have such an international reach. Again, I said this at the beginning before everybody jumped on, but I can't begin to express how much your messages and the feedback. I can't. My water placements are acting up. I'm gonna cry. So anyway, before my tears start, let's go ahead and move to chart number 3, because I'm a goddamn double Cancer with a Scorpio rising, and I cry at the drop of a hat. Let's talk about Danielle. So Danielle was born 5 p.m. in Summit. So we have a Libra ascendant. When we see a Libra ascendant, again, there's a sense of beauty, charisma, natural likableness to the exterior self. Libra is that planet of artists, or that sign of artistry, of being the peacekeeper, of being somebody who naturally just gets, who is the sugar in any situation, is a good way to think about it. They just come into the situation and everything about them just screams niceness, and good intentions. However, we also have an interesting fact about Danielle's chart. She has Pluto very close to the ascendant, retrograde in the first house of self. And we've talked about this multiple times on the live streams, but whenever Pluto is close to the ascendant, and especially when Pluto is in the first house, there's an idea of being associated with darker, shadowy aspects when it comes to personal makeup. So we have this underworld streak in Danielle that I think needs to be honored, needs to be expressed. It's a very difficult placement to have Pluto on the ascendant, and I know because I have it, the idea of the life not really making sense, and or you not feeling like your life has ripened officially until halfway, about 50, 60. In fact, I made this statement to a friend the other day. I said, I really don't think my life's going to start until about 60. And they looked at me and they were like, what? How could you say that? And I was like, that's a total Pluto on the ascendant type of thing to say. And so when we find that Pluto on the ascendant, there's this Hades, Plutonian, god of the underworld energy that's woven into Danielle's personality. But we also have this idea of a lot of power, a lot of gumption, a lot of that true resource. Like, think of the black, loamy soil that's so rich and so full of nutrients, but it's buried under the ground that we can only get to like halfway through the life. And that's very much what Pluto on the ascendant represents. Let's see, we have the chart being ruled by Venus and Gemini in the 9th. So we have somebody who's constantly studying way too many things. Venus in the 9th is great when it rules the ascendant, because it's this stereotypical schoolgirl feel, very kawaii, very, somebody who's just running around with textbooks all the time, talking about the latest thing that they've learned, communicating and spouting off random facts that may or may not be true because of Gemini. You never know when Gemini is actually, fibbing. But when it comes to that 9th house of travel, higher learning, foreigners, spirituality. That's a big, big area that Danielle tends to identify with because the Lord of her chart is there. It wouldn't surprise me if studying shamanism, some of those underworld aspects, because the ninth house is also associated with spirituality, or going deeper into the mysteries of certain cultures that reveal the shadow, are also part of the dynamic. Gemini is known to be that bipolar sign, but when we apply it to the ninth house, which is really a culture and learning sign, very much that higher learning of post-secondary education, there's a really great opportunity to learn about, like as an example, the angelic realm, but also the demonic realm, and how a lot of those angels start to look like devils if you research the text enough, and that dynamic where Gemini is able to expose both extremes of what we would consider, quote unquote, the truth. So that's fun. What else? What else? We have this moon in Pisces in the 6th. That's fun. So in the 6th house of work, health, pets, we have the moon in Pisces. Very intuitive moon, very lovely moon. The moon enjoys being in Pisces because it's a mutable water sign and the moon pulls the waters. Like, it's a very good placement for the moon to be in. I enjoy that. The moon in Pisces in the 6th means that work needs to be emotionally fulfilling for Danielle, but also being of service is emotionally fulfilling for Danielle. We just need to make sure that there is an opposition between the moon, Mars, and Jupiter. Mars and Jupiter being in Virgo in the 12th house of hidden enemies, hospitalizations, karmic healing, opposing the moon in the 6th house. So one of the things that Danielle needs to be aware of is that there may be authority figures, violence, and or injury that comes from taking care of others, especially if that taking care of others is in a hospital, or she becomes a primary caregiver where she's trying to take care of too much at once, and the people that she's taking care of resent her for that, or try to teach her how to do her job when she's trying to be empathetic. And because of that Mars and that Jupiter inflammation kicks in and really starts to disrupt the work environment, which she's so emotionally attached to. So that could be a thing. We do have the Sun and Mercury in Taurus in the 8th. But it's counterbalanced by Uranus and Scorpio retrograde in the 2nd. I think this is what we see: somebody who knows that they should be an entrepreneur. Nobody would deny that, because a Sun in Taurus and Mercury in Taurus, both very level-headed, both in that 8th house of taxes, estates, as well as business. However, we do have Uranus, that planet of unpredictability, in Scorpio, the sign that is hidden, retrograde, the planet going backwards, all in that 2nd house of finance as well. So when it comes to money in Danielle's pocket, there might be unpredictability, there might be hoarding tendencies, there might be money that disappears as quickly as it appears. But when it comes to other people's money, and Danielle actually working with other people's money, she's a goddamn ace. And this comes from especially that mutual reception with Venus and Mercury trading signs, Venus being in Gemini, Mercury being in Taurus, in that 8th house of business, 9th house of higher learning, going to school for things like finance, accounting, and using those skills to take care of other people's resources, especially in the estate planning or business world, something that she'd be creepily good at, oddly enough, and not something that would fulfill her heart so much. But it is something that would really help her to care for people in a sustainable way without activating that Jupiter-Mars opposition between the 6th and the 12th houses. That's a lot of what we talk about in astrology, is understanding how we not just work with placements that are good, but avoid placements that are not so good, or remediate them via lifestyle. And lifestyle does include work. So that's, feeling productive. Okay. Cool. So that was Danielle. Let's move to number 4. So we've got Crystal. Crystal was born 1:35 p.m. in Évreux. It's French. Oh, that's fun. So we've got a Leo ascendant with the moon in Leo, can join the ascendant within 1 degree. Are they? Yeah, they're squaring the sun. Oh, that's bougie. So when we look at the ascendant in Leo, moon in Leo, we have two core personal planets in the sign of Leo, which means that she's a double Leo is a good way to think about it. She has this flamboyant nature. She has this really charismatic vibe to her. Her emotions tend to be a little bit dramatic and over the top. But having a strong personality isn't a crime. Is one thing that I would really tell people to just like back off. I'm living my life. Like, you're not me, Becky. Just make sure that Leo gets a chance to express itself and roar, and it doesn't turn into the jaded Scorpion, which we're about to talk about next. So we have the sun in Scorpio in the fourth house of family, making a square to both the ascendant and the moon. So we have a conflict between the sense of self and the emotions versus the ego. The ego in Crystal's chart wants to withdraw. The ego wants to especially spend time at home, to work from home, potentially in real estate, home-based healthcare, things where she can be on her own turf, in her own room, staying safe, really making sure that everything is mise en place and that she doesn't need to activate those Leo placements to get what she wants. However, that is not possible, Crystal. When we look at you spending so much time at home that you start to become that Scorpio archetype of somebody who is withdrawn, frigid, resentful, emotionally depressed, toxic, yeah, leeching or mooching off of others' emotional, sexual, intimate energy, which is that really, really bottom of the barrel Scorpio. And that's the one that everybody fears. That's the one that nobody enjoys. It's because you're not letting that lion roar in your chart, Crystal, that those traits will start to sneak up to the surface. And especially with Neptune and Scorpio here in the fourth, you're not going to see it coming. You're definitely not going to see it coming. And it sneaks up on you for sure. But it's because of that imbalance between who you are, that idea of the ascendant and the moon and what you're feeling versus what you have to give. And if you don't honor both sides of yourself simultaneously, then we're going to have a problem, honey. We're going to have a problem. And it's going to be no bueno. So that's just something to be aware of. We do have Pluto and Uranus in Virgo in the second house, two outer planets. Oh, crap, honey. Oh, goodness. They were conjoined at 18 degrees when you were born. Lord have mercy on you. So when we have that Pluto planet, I actually like to see Pluto in the second house because I've talked about this before. Pluto is a planet that tends to indicate strong wealth connections, but halfway through the life. Now, Uranus starts to screw this up a little bit. Uranus is, again, that unpredictable thing. But I like what she's done with it because Uranus and Pluto are both in Virgo, a sign which is known to be really, really good with finance. And Mercury is also ruling that placement. And Mercury is over in Sagittarius, another very creative sign, in that fifth house. And so it wouldn't surprise me if she starts to play with stocks. Wouldn't surprise me if Crystal gets really good at just watching financial trends over time and starting to understand how the market works. I think that would be a way to transmute that feeling of powerlessness that Pluto tends to convey early in life, where it's like, I'll never get rich, I'll never have money. Oh, boo-hoo me, I'm the financial victim. To a certain degree, you are, but it's only because the person with the experience ends up with the money when they meet somebody with money and no experience. So once you gain that experience via Pluto, you will then have the cash. But that will only start to happen financially. You'll start to turn that curve about 50, halfway through the life. Okay, so we've got Mars and Venus, both in the sixth house of work, health, pets. So when we see both stereotypical gendering planets in that sixth house of work, health, pets, there's going to be gender issues at work. There's going to be the idea of working with feminine and masculine polarities in the workplace in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about that, especially with Mars taking the dominant theme here, because Mars is in Capricorn, the sign of its exaltation, but Venus is in Capricorn, a sign it doesn't necessarily enjoy being in, a little bit too restrictive, a little bit too hard-headed. That masculine dominance in the workplace is going to be a little bit of an issue. But one of the things that she might actually be able to do for work in the meantime, again, astrology separates what we do for money, what we do for a day job, and what our vocation or our calling or our success, quote unquote, how we define success. Those are three different houses in the chart, three very different areas. And in this case, we have a Capricorn ruled house in the 6th, controlled by Saturn in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates. So working in hospice care, definitely a possibility. But with that financial knowledge as well, it wouldn't surprise me if she went into the legal field, and started to work with people who struggled with bankruptcy, tax evasion, that kind of thing, because she'd be uniquely qualified to help people out of that financial situation, given the power that she holds, but the unpredictability and the rule breaking tendency she holds in that financial house. And she'd actually get very well known for it if she pursues that, because that Venus in Capricorn is ruling the 10th house of career success. Yeah. We do have Jupiter in Cancer ruling the 5th house of creativity, children, and parents. On a lower octave, that's going to be parents and children who are hospitalized, potentially incarcerated as well, because that 12th house, the 12th house is the hidden enemies house. It's also where we put people, places, things that we don't want to deal with, that have caused us chaos, that we would prefer to give them a 50-50 shot of actually making it out alive, before they rejoin the rest of the chart through karmic healing processes. And to have Jupiter, the ruler of the 5th, in the 12th, that's a tricky placement there. But also potentially children and parents could work in those situations as a higher octave of the expression. There could be nursing in the family. There could be being a jailer in the family, and working with, especially if you wanted to think of the financial part of it, stocks and bonds in terms of jail bonds. So pretty cool stuff. We do have this North Node in Gemini ruled by Mercury in Sag in the 5th. So I think one of the things that we're going to need to respect about Crystal's chart is we're really moving towards friendships. We're really moving towards connections. We're really moving towards humanitarian efforts, expanding skills, and using those Leo placements in the 1st house to roar, to be seen by the community, and to potentially make some creative good. Okay, good stuff. Good morning, Jillian. Good morning, everybody who's commenting on Facebook and Instagram and sending me messages. We're halfway through the queue for this morning. If you would like to be a part of the queue, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time. I do need that exact birth time. And for those of you who are overseas, not located in America, please spell out the month and the day so that we don't get those too confused. And likewise, if you'd like to schedule a private consult or check out my online classes, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com and check me out on TikTok as well. I'm doing some pretty fun astro skits on there as well. Okay, halfway through, let's move on to Teresa. So Teresa was born 8:30 p.m. in Shelbyville. Okay, Teresa, honey. So we've got a Scorpio ascendant. Nice. But we've got this Neptune here. This Neptune is very close to the ascendant. This Neptune is retrograde. This Neptune is from from a lower octave, going to talk about addiction issues potentially being present, chemical sensitivities potentially being present, escapist spirituality potentially being present. But also Neptune tends to open us up to the other realities, the other planes of existence. It's kind of like a key to the fairy world is a good way to think about it. So having Neptune very much associated with your ascendant does give you that brush of the fae, and allows you to explore fantasy worlds that other people could only dream of, which is both, really, really fun, but can also be dangerous if left unchecked. And especially if you don't nourish that spiritually creative energy of Neptune, then we're going to find that you reach towards substances, that you reach towards outlets that get you to feel those feelings, potentially in a toxic way due to Scorpio. The ruler of the chart is Mars in Pisces, which definitely complements the watery energy of Neptune. We can think of that as a mutual reception, although I'm a traditional astrologer. I use the outer planets, but I don't necessarily consider the outer planets as rulers of signs per se. Like Neptune would traditionally not be counted because Neptune wasn't discovered. And so we would think of Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces. However, Neptune is associated with Pisces. Mars is in Neptune, and Mars is in Pisces, rather. And then Mars is also the ruler of Scorpio, which Neptune is in. So I'll count that as a mutual reception. There is connection between the first house of self, fifth house of family, creativity, sexuality. I think with Mercury here in Pisces and Venus here in Pisces, we've got enough personal planets in the fifth house to say that you'd really, like, part of your life identity is to become a parent. Part of your life identity is to become an artist. Part of your life identity is to work with children. And so those core factors, especially because that sun in Aries is being ruled by the Mars in the fifth house, we've got a lot of really great creative energy in the fifth house that I think is tied into who you are, which is what I like to see when we find like an outer planet messing up the ascendant. We then have personal planets in other houses which support the positive expression of that outer planet, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have an outlet. Yeah, so you got your outlet if you nourish your creativity, if you become a parent, if you work with children, then you'll be able to find some of this watery energy, some of this fantasy realm that you've spent so much time cultivating, be put to use. But if not, then it's going to start to express itself negatively in other ways. We also have the sun at 15 degrees Aries making a trine to Neptune and Leo retrograde in the 10th. The sun not only making a trine, but also ruling that Uranus and that MC up in the 10th house of career success. So I think becoming an entrepreneurial tendency is definitely part of that, because the work house is connected to the success house. So going out on your own, something that I see very, very often with those placements. But again, I really want to emphasize the idea of working with children, potentially being an on-call nanny, working as a surrogate parent, working as a stay-at-home parent who can also channel artistry really, really well into that. I think all of those are appropriate placements. But again, the more we look at the chart, the more we're seeing kids, 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 parents, 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 creativity, creativity, creativity. Okay. We got the moon in Cancer in the 9th at 23 degrees, making a trine to that south node, sextile to that north node. Am I a fan of that? Am I a fan of that? Kind of. So we have this moon in Cancer, which naturally makes you very nurturing, very loving, very motherly, mama bear-ish too, because Cancer, what everybody sleeps on Cancer about, is the idea that Cancer is still a cardinal sign and will freaking cut you if you step near any of those maternal or family aspects of a strong Cancer placements chart. So that's something that we need to be aware of. Again, like potentially going to school for the artistry stuff, going to school for childcare, working in the fertility space, like all of that. Super, like, you'd be a great doula, that kind of stuff. Really, 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 really good. We do have that Mercury in Pisces ruling the Virgo in the 11th. Is that connected to Saturn? No, we'd need to go into that one-on-one. That's a little bit tricky. So we're not going to cover that on on the forecast there. That needs to be unpacked a little bit. But when we look at that ruler of the North Node, Mercury, being in that fifth house of children, family, children, parents, sexuality, creativity, and then ruling that North Node in Virgo up in the 11th house of friendships, community, as well as social groups. Again, just working with people in the fertility, the parenting space, working with children, and working in a community environment, very much what you're trying to foster this time around. Like, you'd be really great if you have any issues whatsoever. Like, if you're having a bad week, just grab a children's book and go read at the local library. It'll fix you right up. I promise. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you sending me messages. I will get to them after all this. As you can see, I'm a little bit busy at the moment. But yes. So let's go ahead and go to Catherine. Catherine, how do you do? So we have Catherine, born at 6:07 a.m. in Chatham. Tanning Chatham. Okay, so we have the ascendant at 19 degrees Pisces, the moon at 18 degrees Pisces, and Saturn in Pisces at 11 degrees, opposing, get this, Mars in Virgo retrograde, Uranus in Virgo retrograde, conjunct together, and then Pluto in Virgo, all retrograde in the 7th house. Not a fan. We've got some interesting placements, Catherine, in this chart. We need to be very aware that a lot of these placements are difficult. And so although we can channel a lot of really great stuff, which I'll talk about too, these placements are tough. Very, very tough. So we have the moon conjunct the ascendant in Pisces, makes you very, very emotional. It makes you also very, very intuitive. I enjoy that, especially because we have Neptune and Scorpio retrograde making a trine to the ascendant. So you're no prude. Like, you definitely understand what it means to get into the dark side of life on multiple levels. And I enjoy that about you, Catherine. I really do. I think it makes you who you are. But that Saturn in Pisces is a little bit of a problem in the first house. Whenever we see Saturn in the first house, it always indicates a late bloomer, somebody who doesn't mature really or feel comfortable in their own skin until about 30. But somebody who ripens like a fine wine is a good way to say it. So because we have all this emotional energy, and again, those alcohol analogies with Pisces really become appropriate. But that Saturn really taking a very strict, very rigid, very almost punishment attitude, especially from an emotional guilt complex. Spiritual guilt also being very much tied to that ascendant placement. So understanding that we have a lot of harsh energy from Saturn coming to you right off the bat as soon as you're born, which is not easy to handle, Catherine. I'm not necessarily a fan of it. And then that Saturn is opposing Mars. Mars is also retrograde. Having 3 retrograde planets in the 7th house of relationships is not necessarily ideal. So when we find Saturn on the ascendant, like you're really hard on yourself personally, and then we have all of these outer planet transits and Mars, which tends to be a little bit aggressive in the 7th house of relationships, you're also prone to choose a spouse or a partner who is also not easy on you, for sure. And that's difficult. It'll probably get easier halfway through the life, and choosing a second partner for a second go around will be much easier, although it will still have its problems because Uranus is that planet of unpredictability. Mars tends to be super aggressive and overly ambitious about it. And then Pluto, again, that planet of toxic power that gradually becomes more and more usable halfway through the life. So all of those areas being placed in your 7th house of relationships, not really a fan. But let's go to the 2nd house in your chart, because the 2nd house of finance is very, very well placed. And I enjoy this immensely. So we have the seventh house, all in Virgo, being ruled by Mercury in Aries retrograde. So Mars is retrograde, Mercury is retrograde. They're both retrograde and they're both in each other's signs. It's kind of like you and your spouse have decided that you're going to harumph together about finance. And that's going to be one of the big things that you find common ground on is like, well, got to pay the bills. Well, you know, checking account's low again. It's going to be a big connection point between you two is financial wellness, or in some cases, not so much wellness. We do have the Sun in Aries here in the second house, as well as Venus in Aries in the second house, which I like to see. And I think that being doted on with gifts is definitely something that allows your soul to feel very satisfied. The unpredictability that you've had in your life and that you experience from other partners, definitely something that needs to be mitigated with a little bit of stability. And that stability comes through the second house placements. And whenever we see Venus in the second house, it's that acquisition of material resources that is really, really soothing to that sun. The sun in Aries is exalted. It loves to be in Aries. You know, the more I see it, it wouldn't surprise me if you worked as an auctioneer, would be something that could potentially have happened as an extreme case, because that sun in Aries with that Mercury retrograde, again, they tend to talk fast but almost backwards, ruling that sixth house of work, but also health and pets. That's a big thing. But yeah, finance very much connected in your chart. I think some of your best placements are when it comes to money, and working with not just wealth as in cash, but wealth as in time, wealth as in energy, and finding ways to shake off those things from a slightly competitive and aggressive Aries stint, which also shakes you out of that Pisces funk that you tend to find yourself in when you accrue too much psychic energy. All of these Aries placements just let you burn it off. I am a fan of Jupiter and Taurus here in the third of writing, teaching, communication. Again, means your voice is very loud. Your voice is very soothing. It allows people to find comfort. It allows people, again, like you have a voice where you know how to talk money. The minute that you start talking money, you unlock a lot of really powerful placements in the chart. And I think that the Jupiter in Taurus is a perfect example of that, being ruled by Venus and Aries in the second house of finance. So if you're not in that field, if you haven't explored that area, I definitely would. But again, a lot of your chart is talking to us about the idea of breaking through a lot of the harsher, more oppressive aspects that you've enforced on yourself, and that spouses have forced on you in the past, because that's where a lot of the damage and the breakage lies that needs to continually be readdressed and healed, but we'll get better halfway through the life. Good morning, everybody. We got two more charts. So let's go with Meredith. Okay, Meredith, born at 6:03 p.m. in Albany. We have a Cancer ascendant, which puts the moon as the ruler. Oh, and we have a setup very similar to the first or second chart that we found. The ascendant in Cancer being ruled by a moon in Aquarius in the 8th gives natural telepathic, slightly intuitive abilities. Also brings slight, one of the more extreme cases that I've seen is near-death experience. But also the idea of the sense of self being tied to topics of the 8th house, being death, being taxes, being estates, as well as business entrepreneurship, and the like. So that's always fun. The rulership of moon belongs to Saturn. Saturn is in Virgo in the third. Oh, honey, you really withhold your words, don't you? That's a little bit tricky. That moon being ruled by a Saturn in Virgo placement. You've got a lot of fire in the chart too, so I think that the words have a good potential in order to get out. But by the time that they actually make it out of your mouth, not only are they backwards, but they tend to come out as a little bit too laughy, a little bit too sparky, a little bit too sarcastic would be a good way to say it. because here's how it goes. You have a thought, you have a feeling. It has to get filtered through this Saturn in Virgo first. And then by the time that it gets filtered through Saturn in Virgo, it hops to this Mercury in Sagittarius retrograde. And by the time that it comes out of your mouth, again, not only is it backwards, but people also don't get what you're meaning, or they misinterpret it as, oh, she's just making a joke. I'm not making a joke, Karen. I'm trying to say what I think and what I feel, but it's just coming out wrong. It's a good way to think about it. So that's a little bit of a tricky placement. We do have good earning potential in the chart, though. Jupiter in Leo in the second house. It is retrograde, but it's still a freaking Jupiter in Leo. In mutual reception to the sun in Sagittarius in the sixth house of work, health, pets. So work, health, pets, making a lot of money from those industries. Definitely, the harder you work, the more money you'll make. It'll be fantastic. Yay. Especially with that eighth house moon being a business moon. It's good fortune from a business perspective. We do have Mars in Sagittarius, Neptune in Sagittarius, retrograde, Mercury in Sagittarius, and the Sun in Sagittarius, all in that house of work, health, pets. So an identification very, very strongly with work. Also being a jack of all trades when it comes to work, needing to fulfill multiple different roles, like the creative designer, the email person, the secretary, the marketer, the manager, like doing so many different things. Is also what makes you really good at what you do, Meredith. So I don't think you're one of the people that I would say, don't put away the different prongs of your Swiss Army knife, embrace them, because the Swiss Army knife of your personality and of your work ethic and what you've learned along the way is actually very, very valuable to you when it comes to just a success and a work perspective. But we just need to work on that communication style. I think if there's one thing that I would really drive home in your chart, we need to learn how to use your words wisely, think before you speak. And in this case, especially to mitigate that Mercury, write down what you're about to say. And this is something where I find when Saturn's in the third, when Mercury is retrograde in the chart in a key communication house, the one thing that I'd like to tell you is script out your conversations beforehand. So if you're going into an important meeting or you're having a conversation with a friend, a family member, somebody that's really, really important to you, write out, as if you were writing a script for a play, what you would say, what they would say back, what you would say in return, etc. Script it out. That way you can write it, you can erase it, you can work your words out beforehand, like a forge master would work out a piece of metal, and you can really understand what it is you're about to say and why, as opposed to trying to wing it, which never works out well. And you know this. I don't know why you keep doing it. And that's just part of that dynamic, is the more you embrace that miscommunication aspect of your chart and constructively work with it, the easier it will be to make those changes that will lead to greater and greater prosperity, because people will actually know what you mean. Cool. So yeah, that's a little bit about Meredith's chart. Let's go ahead and look at our last chart, which is Michaela. Michaela was born 2:21 p.m. in Brooklyn. We have a Capricorn ascendant making Saturn. What's up with all these Saturn and Virgos? So we have Saturn ruling the chart. Saturn is up in the ninth house of travel, higher education, foreigners, as well as the North Node. I like to see that. That's one of the things that I really enjoy seeing in a chart, is when the ruler of the ascendant is very close to the North Node, because it means that their personality is uniquely equipped to fulfill their life's purpose. They don't really need to work on that aspect so much. There's other areas that they need to work on, like specifically, we're going to talk about this moon in 2 seconds. But the idea of her sense of self, Michaela's sense of self, being in that travel, foreigners, higher education space, and her knowing that if she just keeps plugging away, if she just keeps working over time, she'll not only get very good at what she does, but she'll start to fulfill more and more of why she's here, because her track has already been predefined. She knows what she's doing and why she's doing it, which is a blessing. But we do have this moon. So we need to talk about Michaela's emotional state. This moon is in Leo. This moon is also conjunct Jupiter by at 3 degrees. So the moon is at 1 degree Jupiter is at 3. The moon is applying to a conjunction in Leo in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, and business. When I see the moon conjunct Jupiter in a frickin' fire sign, that is a recipe for emotional, just waves of heat. Jupiter makes anything it touches big, and so the moon is doubled, tripled, quadrupled in size. Leo also tends to be a little bit of a showboat, in case you haven't figured that out already. We have a sextile between Jupiter and the sun in Libra too, so there's this massive amount of overly expressive energy that seems to come out at totally the wrong place and totally the wrong time, because the moon and Jupiter are in that 8th house of death, taxes, estates, business. Like it's very much a mischanneled over enthusiasm is what other people would really view that as, is like, oh wow, you know, she seems so grounded, she seems so cool, and then she opened her mouth and she started throwing out all of this Leo fire, and she kind of lost all that groundedness. And this is where we look at remediation, because the Lord of your chart cannot see your sun, which is the perfect blend in between the two. This is why the astrologers get the big bucks, is to help you figure out what years of therapy couldn't. And so when we look at the sun being in Libra, Mercury being in Libra, Pluto being in Libra, MC being in Libra, all in the 10th house of career success, there's this idea of not being the stern Virgo-oriented Saturn, which is trying to put everything into a box, color code those boxes, tabulate those boxes, order those boxes alphabetically, and then color code them just for good measure. It's not about that, right? Instead, it's also not about you just flying by the seat of your pants and letting your mane wave in the metaphorical blow dryer that is life, and feeling your oats and allowing this Leo Jupiter moon energy to infiltrate your life and just winging it based off of, you know, good looks or charisma alone. Instead, we find the 10th house is really telling you, Michaela, to become the peacekeeper, to find balance, to create a sense of ease, camaraderie, to build bridges, not burn them. You know, Saturn likes to destroy a bridge because it's weak, inferior, and then rebuild it better. Leo prefers just to burn the bridge altogether. Either way, the bridge is compromised and the connections are disturbed. So we really need to make sure that in your chart specifically, Michaela, that we don't let the critical voice or the overly confident voice win, that we find a nice peace through your Libra sun, and we allow mediation to take place in the chart, and we allow your sense of peacekeeping, justice, and all around balance to come forward. You keep very unusual friends, Michaela. Very unusual friends. I'm not judging. I just think it's interesting because we have Mars and Scorpio here, we have Uranus and Scorpio here, and we have Venus and Scorpio here. Venus and Scorpio is Venus in her exile. She does not like to be in Scorpio. It's like taking the princess from the top of the tower and throwing her out in the kingdom to forage in the woods for herself. These are the kinds of people that you tend to attract. Mars and Scorpio is the stereotypical ninja assassin archetype. And then we have Uranus and Scorpio, which is that kind of underneath this lovely wooden floor, we have the telltale heart that's beating underneath it all, of some murdered corpse that's rotting in somebody's skeleton closet from back when they were a teenager. And you're uniquely equipped to deal with these people. So when it comes to like your interesting choice of social circle, I think that friends will bleed into work very naturally for you. And because of that, you'll be able to turn a lot of your friends into clients. But when it comes to your specific skill set, just know that you're supposed to be working with people who are in that shadowy realm of Scorpio, who tend to hide things, who tend to keep secrets, who tend to be on that darker side of life, who tend to enjoy the seed, enjoy playing in the muck, as it were, of life. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, some very, very strong power can come from that. And as your Pluto matures in the 10th, it wouldn't surprise me if you start to become involved with very powerful people. But the idea of your chart maturing in a way that is needing balance first and foremost, And then accessing power through social groups and friendships. That's really where we see a lot of your chart shining. Cool. So that is it for the Astro-Babble for today. Trying to keep it underneath an hour. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Facebook, Instagram. If you would like to be in the queue, send your birth date, place, and time to me via private message. Do not post those in the public comments. Your privacy is important to me. And then also send in friends, family. We'll keep the queue going as long as I have charts to read. And then if you'd like to schedule a private consult to get a little bit deeper, I am accepting private clients. You can just go to scorpiorisingastrology.com and check out the online classes, fill out a consultation request form. Let me know what you're interested in. We'll get you on the books. Follow me on TikTok. Follow my daily astro forecasts where I track the transits of the day via Facebook and Instagram. Instagram is a little bit better because the Facebook algorithms are a little bit screwed up. And we will be back here tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. for another round of the Astro-Babble. And in the meantime, may the stars be ever in your favor.